Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Yeshua loved following them, the one who had also leaned back on his bosom at the supper, and said, "Lord, who is the one that betrays you?" So Peter, seeing him, said to Yeshua,
"Lord, what about this man?"
If I want him to live until I come, what is that to you? Follow me.
Therefore this saying went out among the brethren, that disciple would not die. Yet Yeshua did not say to him that he would not die, but only, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you?" I've been haunted by those words for 20 years. If I want him to remain until I come. Yes, I clearly understood the context and Yeshua's exhortation to Peter to follow the Lord single-mindedly regardless of what anyone else did. Though I agree with that, there was still something about the passage that compelled me to believe that John never died, and Yeshua had some special mission for him that involved remaining alive here on the earth. I know it sounds absurd. The next verse even explains that it was a rumor, John himself being the writer, and declares that Yeshua never said John would stay alive, only that if he wanted him to do so, it wasn't Peter's business. I was quite aware of that, but I also saw that in phrasing it as he did, he never shut the door on the possibility. Plus, John was still alive when he wrote it, and being the vessel that God used to inscribe it doesn't necessarily mean he knew what it would all come to. Even a scholastic luminary like Edgar J. Goodspeed in his book The 12, published by John Winston Company, Philadelphia, 1957, page 19, he says, "There is no record of John's martyrdom. Without such evidence, the scripture should be considered." There were other scriptures that I took into account, but I was not able to resolve anything. I only became more frustrated. My friends told me I was being obsessive and ridiculous. They became concerned about my spiritual well-being, so I stopped talking about it. However, I decided clandestinely to research the matter until I could find clear evidence that John was dead and buried, or if the opposite was true, that I would find him and meet him personally. Here is the record of my journey and the startling discovery that I made. What I knew from the beginning was that most biblical historians put John's age at around 92 when he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos, a remote Roman desert penal colony. It was the year 95, and the Roman Emperor Domitian was reportedly angry at the fact that John was not killed when he was thrown into boiling oil. Why he didn't try some other method is not clear. I guess it's rather frustrating to despots just trying to do their job. This business of lame lions' dens and faulty fiery furnaces and bogus boiling oil. Hence, exile. But at some point after his stint on Patmos, supposedly after 15 years of converting everyone on the island, John was allowed back in Ephesus. The Orthodox Church has always believed that John never died. After returning to Ephesus, he stayed in the house of Domnus, who, when he had been a youth, John raised him from death. He brought many to faith and performed miracles. One morning before dawn, he took some of his followers to a place to pray, and he ordered them to dig a grave as deep as his height, in the form of a cross. He had them cover him with earth to the neck. They kissed him for the last time and placed a napkin over his face, wept bitterly and covered him entirely. Others soon after, on hearing about this, dug up his grave and found nothing. The legend is found in the great collection of the Lives of the Saints, translated from the Slavonic edition published by the Christian print shop of the Transfiguration Almshouse in Moscow in 1914. It was translated into English by the Chrysostom Press in Missouri in 1994, page 441 if you want to look it up. The account also has been preserved in an apocryphal history of the Apostle John, supposedly written by Procurus, the name of one of the 7 deacons in Acts chapter 6, verse 5. Later tradition makes him one of the 70 disciples, and then a disciple of John. Procurus also claims John's gospel was dictated to him. He said John resided 26 more years in Ephesus, which would make him around 133 when he was buried alive. Procurus and six other disciples ostensibly did the digging, and when John had laid himself in, it covered him with earth. I tracked down every source I heard, regardless of how obscure. Every theological, historical, and archaeological reference was scrutinized, and John's trail started opening up to me. I was astonished at the territory covered by the incredible range of identities he adopted. His influence was significant in every place he went, but in each one it was manifested differently, and for a wide range of time periods. I'm giving you a brief overview. It would take hundreds, maybe thousands of pages to come near the volume of information I've unearthed. In church legends, he's a very Orthodox Christian. Of course, John is a Jew, but he did not always make that known. This is why I dismiss no source out of hand. This is why John's footprints are visible to me. Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, and other sources all have something to say about him. Even if there was only a brief mention, it was usually enough to recognize him from my vantage point. Sometimes he came out of nowhere like Elijah. Other times people seemed to think that they knew him, that he had been in the community for years. He appears in many Talmudic tractates once the code is broken that allows you to understand the hidden meanings behind what seem to be pointless ramblings. The famous Islamic historian and poet of the 9th century, Ali Abdul Azim, wrote of a Dimhi named Yochanan, with whom he often conversed, a Jewish street sweeper in Damascus. Ali was amazed that his vast knowledge surpassed most scholars that he knew. Plus, when most Jews refused to acknowledge Isa, or Jesus in Arabic, in any way, Yochanan spoke as if he knew him personally. I followed him from country to country, culture to culture. Sometimes he was an old man, sometimes younger, whatever was needed. Appearance changes were certainly no great challenge for the supernatural power of God that was regenerating him through the centuries. In certain situations, he needed to take on an identity of someone who was dying. The Lord, in his foreknowledge, would do a bit of plastic surgery on John, morphing his features to those of the person he would replace in time for the switch. Then, in the eyes of everyone, the dying man had miraculously recovered. The deceased was secretly buried, while John continued in his place. Over the ages, John has occupied numerous roles, both lowly and exalted: beggar, court physician, village idiot, town rabbi, fisherman, not just on the Sea of Galilee, and tax collector. Traveling merchant and farmer, wandering troubadour and church organist, carpenter and shepherd, miller and inn proprietor, baron and serf. One can do much in 2,000 years, and obscurity and notoriety are both effective disguises. The trail remained strong until Iceland and Greenland about CE 1000. It started getting choppy, but I didn't start worrying about it until the 13th century, as it was becoming more difficult every day. With large gaps in the details, I still found him in Spain in CE 1478. That was the year King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile established the Spanish Inquisition. Not only was that the beginning of an extremely dark and evil time, having ascertained that John was there, I was unable to continue to follow him. Surely he could not have perished in the nefarious clutches of the Inquisition after coming so far. For weeks and on to months I prayed, pleaded, even for a toe print, but nothing. Then the breakthrough came. My next-door neighbor's grandfather died and left him with the contents of his library. Among his collection were some quite rare and valuable volumes. One in particular stood out. It was printed in England in the late 1700s, written by an Anglican clergyman, Reverend Terence Chesterton. He was considered somewhat of an oddball in his denomination because of his relationship with non-denominational revivalist groups and the early Hasidic movement in Judaism in Eastern Europe. No other editions of Chesterton's book were known to exist. I'd come across references to it, but nobody knew where to find it. Suddenly I was holding a copy. It was a fascinating account of the Reverend's first-hand experiences with these groups and the individuals that were the driving forces behind them. Some that would become household names in generations to come, others who contributed to what was happening in one camp or the other and then disappeared from history. But there among them, I found John's trail again. Chesterton makes mention of an enigmatic person by the name of Yochanan ben Kolot, who had a strong connection with Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. and with his closest disciples. What was unusual about Yochanan was that he often showed up at church revival outreaches. In the book, Reverend Chesterton mentions how much he was impressed by the breadth of Yochanan's knowledge and wisdom, but just couldn't quite figure him out. He seemed to belong in both camps, yet at the same time not of this earth at all. Again, the path became easier to follow, not a cakewalk, but definitely visible with the past patterns as a guide. John came back to the land of Israel around the time of the First World War. He walked into Jerusalem behind General Allenby in 1917, after the British defeated the Turks. From that point onwards, he rarely left Israel, sojourning in various parts of the country, from the Negev in the south to the border with Lebanon in the north. He was in Jerusalem again in 1948, the time of the War of Independence, and in 1967, the Six-Day War. John was living in the religious neighborhood of Mea Shearim in Jerusalem in the mid-70s to the late 80s. He appeared to be about 60 years old, but unlike most of the religious, he was of ruddy complexion, straight carriage, and exuded an aura of strength. However, akin to them, he did wear all black, his graying beard was ample, and he spent many hours in the yeshivot study halls. That his origins were vague and that he was 60 years old and single with no family ties in Israel normally would put people off. Nevertheless, he was frequently sought after because of his wisdom and deep understanding about life. Even more significant than that, he seemed to embody the love of God. In the 15 years he was in that religious neighborhood, he had a profound effect on many lives. He's still remembered reverently by those who knew him there, 33 years after he disappeared in 1989. From about June 1984 to January 1985, he was in Sudan, working with the Jewish Agency helping to prepare Ethiopian refugees returned to Israel in what would become known as Operation Moses. Sometime in 1986, back in Jerusalem, he befriended an American actor who was in the country doing a movie. They met, supposedly by accident, at a coffee shop, but of course in these matters there are no coincidences. That was another unusual thing about John. When in his Orthodox Jewish identity he was not afraid of being seen in places, even non-kosher ones, that religious Jews rarely if ever enter. He began spending much time observing on the movie sets and speaking with his friend when filming allowed it. When the American returned home, correspondence was maintained by mail and phone calls. John had given him some challenging personal prophecies about the next few years, and it was a difficult time in the actor's life. The encouragement that continued to flow out of Jerusalem from John was much appreciated. In the spring of 1989, he was shooting another film, this time in the Philippines. On May 16th, tragedy struck. The film company helicopter crashed at night, killing all 5 persons on board. Initially, it was thought that the actor died in the accident, but he was there the next day when the bodies were sent to their respective families for burial. 2 of the dead were Filipinos, and 3 were Americans. There was some confusion regarding the identities because of some faulty paperwork and the condition of the bodies, but it was straightened out. The film crew that had worked with the actor on the Israeli film had seen John in Jerusalem. They had heard that he would be coming to the Philippines set. What was ironic, though, was that John was due to arrive on the day of the crash. Insofar as anyone knows, he never made it to where they were shooting the film. However, the airline records show that he entered the plane in Tel Aviv, and several eyewitnesses confirmed his appearance. The airline in the Philippines also confirmed that they have a record of him being on the plane, but no witnesses could remember seeing him. Filming resumed after a week hiatus, and nothing was said about the guest from Israel who never came. Of course, it should now be evident to anyone following this fantastic tale that I have come to a solid conviction about the ongoing life and ministry of the beloved Apostle John. This last situation holds the key to the mystery of his identity. He did arrive in the Philippines, as scheduled, and he did come to the movie set, as planned. He remained there while the body of his friend, the American actor, who had been on the helicopter, was shipped back to the States for a private family burial. And then John remained there in his new identity and finished his lead role in the movie. 4 years later, he began a new project that would continue for years and skyrocket his career far beyond what it had achieved until now, and as a consequence, gave him a public image, a fantastic reputation, and unlimited visibility throughout the whole world. In 1993, production began on his television series. The rest is history. Yes, dear friends, Chuck Norris is John the Apostle.
Yes, dear friends in the social media world, you heard it here first. Chuck Norris is the Apostle John, and that's not the only exclusive story that Moshe has to tell. Discover the identity of the true author of almost every popular song lyric over the last 50 years. Learn how 2 young bodybuilders got Mr. Universe bodies in just 24 hours. Find out why certain people you went to school with years ago look the same today as they did then. All this and more in Moshe Morrison's book of short stories, Out of the Corner of My Eye, available at obt-books.com. Order your copy today.